Welcome to Product Talk. I'm Hoda Mehr, CEO of Products That Count, with another special episode. Today I'm joined by Kyle Miller, General Manager of Yahoo Mail, a product that has been a part of the internet's DNA for decades, and it's now going under a significant reinvention under the leadership of Kyle.
It's not a typical journey to go from marketing to product in the first place, but I think it really stemmed at me trying to figure out how to change a brand narrative. And I realized that marketing was the talking the talk of it, but if you really want to change it, you have to walk the walk through the product experience itself.
So Kai's career has spanned both across marketing and product, including a pivotal time at Tinder before stepping into one of the toughest jobs in tech, as we can talk about later today, leading a legacy product into the future.
We're trying to not just be an inbox. I think we're trying to transform it into more of a personal productivity engine.
We'll explore three arcs of conversation today: how his career evolved, what it really takes to turn around a massive, long-standing product like Yahoo Mail, and what leadership lessons he's learned over the course of his career. If you're a product manager who's working on massive turnaround stories, or if you're a product manager who's looking for that career progression from a PM to GM, from product manager to CEO of a business, this episode's for you.
The step up from the VP of product job to the GM is not too dissimilar to that, except like with a big asterisk of it is at a way bigger scale. You cannot be as in the weeds to do it, but you have to create systems in environments where the leaders that are around you can be set up to create those environments themselves.
Without further ado, Kyle, welcome to Product Talk.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Well, we have lots of good questions planned for today's conversation, so let's jump in. Let's just start with your journey. I know you and I were talking a couple of months ago, and one of the things it actually stood out is just your journey is not a typical journey. It's very unique. I've never really seen a lot of folks gone through this journey. You started from marketing before moving into product, and now you own an entire business as the general manager. So the path holds a lot of clues for product managers who want to sort of expand and broaden their scope, sort of the traditional from PM to GM journey that everybody wants to have. So let's just start from there. What did marketing at Tinder teach you that you're now carrying it into your product leadership journey?
It definitely taught me a lot. You're right. It's not a typical journey to go from marketing to product in the first place. But I think it really stemmed at me trying to figure out how to change a brand narrative. And I realized that marketing was the talking the talk of it, but if you really want to change it, you have to walk the walk through the product experience itself. So I think, really put a lot of influence around product narratives and how product narratives shape your brand perception over time. And not making it overly complex as well, but like driving a lot of simplicity through your brand narrative. And so people could not just understand it and get it, but they could share it with people as well. And they could talk about it in a very simple way that is not overly complex or too wordy. And, if you have that recipe, you could align thousands of people around your narrative and they will do the work for you to get the word out. So it was really that connection between walking the walk and talking the talk of the narrative of the brand and product that, helped carry through not just in the product, but into this role as well.
Hi, this is Renee Nemi, Resident Chief Product Officer at Products That Count. We're taking a quick break to chat with a friend of the show, Mighty Capital. GP of Mighty Capital, SC Mawadi, is here with me. SC, for listeners who don't know yet, what makes your approach different?
We're a product-first venture firm, so we back enterprise founders where product is the growth engine. Our edge is what we call the CPO alpha effect, which is a data-backed framework that helps us source, diligence, and help companies scale faster. That's how we backed category winners like Amplitude, Airbnb, Grok, and more.
Yeah, and the results speak for themselves. You celebrated your 6th IPO with Netscope recently, right?
We're so proud of the founders, and You're right. The goal is compounding product excellence. So over time, about 1 in 5 of our companies becomes an outlier.
Yeah, and you don't just write a check either.
Right. We plug teams into product, design partners, and our CPO fellows who roll up their sleeves on roadmap, pricing, and go to market so that teams hit milestones faster and raise on better terms.
So if I'm a founder building a B2B product, how do I engage?
Well, email me at sc@mighty.capital or message me on LinkedIn or X, and I'm happy to connect.
Awesome. Love it. Learn more at mighty.capital. Now back to the show.
Yeah, it's almost you actually nail product management from your marketing lens. Is that good products are the products that tell best stories or have the better narrative because people buy into the story and the narrative and the feeling that they have when they use a product. It's not the actual feature. So it's almost maybe every product manager needs to start from marketing because that lens, that understanding is quite critical. But let's talk about, when you made the transition from marketing to product, what did you do in order to earn the credibility? And product managers are one of the toughest crowd out there. They're very um sort of open and they're very aggressive. They're as we all know, and they're very to the point usually. So how did you go about sort of building your credibility early on when you're moving from marketing to product management?
Yeah, I definitely had a interesting experience with this because I was the head of brand marketing and one of the marketing leaders in the organization, and I convinced my CEO to let me jump over to the product side but start at the very bottom. And part of that deal was he purposely, and we talk about it still to this day, did not change my title to anything that was product related for the first 2 years. And he said, let's see how far you can get without actually being called a product manager. So I could not, it immediately kicked out a leg of a stool that people would sit on, which is, you sitting in front of engineers and designers, analysts, and they're wondering why they need to listen to you. And you're saying, oh, I'm the product manager. I didn't have that. And so I had to use informal authority to actually get this work across the line. And I couldn't lean on just my title alone. And so that was because, I remember my first meeting, I went to it in my first spec review, and they were all sitting there and they're like, aren't you in marketing? Like, why are we listening to you? And I think it was that moment that made me realize that, yes, I will need to use different tools and tactics to kind of bring people along for this ride. So I think that was one piece of kind of building credibility, was immediately not using formal authority to drive that credibility. I think the second was, coming from marketing to product, there was a lot that I did not know. I did not understand engineering systems at a level that would be in depth enough to talk about. I knew marketing design, but product design was new to me. And so instead of pretending like I did know those things, instead, I was very clear with everyone that there were things I didn't know. All I could speak to is the user experience that we were trying to create together. And I would let them figure out what that meant for their engineering architecture or the product design. And I would obviously work closely with them, but I did not pretend like I knew something I didn't. And it actually created a lot of buy-in from the team because it opened up their lane a lot, and they didn't have anyone interrupting their own creative process for how systems need to be designed or how a product needs to look and feel. And so I think that it was almost a benefit, actually, that I was, very obviously naive about what I didn't know. And I just made it clear to everyone that there were things I didn't know, and it allowed them to really accelerate. And so I think those were kind of the 2 points that helped me build credibility really early on. And then I think that attached to just overall being a high agency individual, where I was not waiting around for instructions. I was just running and going and not waiting around for permission. I think that they appreciated that not waiting around mentality, and someone who was actually going to have a motor and drive a lot of these things forward. So yeah, it was an interesting experiment after, 2 years of not having a product title, but had been doing product. And it taught me a lot of good lessons about informal authority.
By the time you change your title, they were probably all surprised, and they asked him, so wasn't he already leading product wise? What is this title change now? They already accepted you.
It became a joke in the office for sure. Yeah.
That's clever. I'm glad that first of all you did that and you had that like agency and then oversight, like that foresight to see that, but also it's from a leadership point of view that your CEO kind of like at the beginning said, let's not change your title, let's just let you kind of go in and do what you do best, and then we'll worry about those things. That's a clever leadership decision.
I think he probably was thinking about it differently at the time than in retrospect, but it all worked out in the way that it should have. So
it all worked out, yeah. So let's fast forward. Then you basically became a product leader and started running products. And then at some point, you made this transition, like a upward movement to not only owning the product, but then you're owning now as a general manager, owning the entire business. So let's talk about that. What does that transition look like? What does the stepping up and expanding your scope look like? What does that PM to GM kind of move look like for you?
Yeah. So the PM to VP of product was one that I was very conscious about, and I tried to apply product thinking to that role, but instead of just thinking about the product itself and how to optimize it, I was thinking about it through the lens of how to optimize the team as my product, like the product team being the product I was trying to create efficiencies, remove blockers, trying to remove friction in their processes. And so I applied some of those mechanics of obviously what great PMs do into team development. The step up from the VP of product job to the GM is not too dissimilar to that, except like with a big asterisk of it is at a way bigger scale. And optimizing a team of 20 to 30 product managers versus a team of 500, you cannot be as in the weeds to do it, but you have to create systems in environments where the leaders that are around you could be set up to create those environments themselves instead of you doing all of it. So you're moving from being the driver to actually just being the one that creates the alignment in the environment for them to get those right answers. So I think that was a big shift that came with it, but one that I was very conscious of, having closely studied, some of my mentors who've made the similar leap. And, doing it at a way bigger scale, I think, you learn the right fundamentals from PM to a product leader to prepare you for the GM job, which is why I think it's a very popular track to go down. But, the scaling part of scaling yourself is actually the biggest challenge of it all. Because, you might be able to scale yourself to 30 people, but 300 or 500 is a very different story.
Yeah. Two things come to my mind. One is like we actually see quite a few chief product officers, CPOs in the community that their next career is a CEO. So it's almost, again, a PM to GM, but from a product owner to a business owner. So we see a lot of that transition, and it's pretty cool to be able to see that at the PM to the GM level as well, and then at the CPO to the CEO sort of like transition expansion. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is, was there sort of assumptions that you made before you kind of have this expanded role? You talk about a scale, but did you know a scale is going to be the biggest thing that you need to solve through and figure out your ways? Or what are other things that you were thinking, oh, these are going to be my challenge? And then you went into the role and they're like, those were not a problem at all. It's just this scaling thing. Was there like basically a surprise as you expanded your role?
Yeah, well, as much as I'm talking about scaling myself, it is still like an ongoing endeavor of me learning how to best do it. For the first couple of months of the GM job, I obviously was looking for a backfill of my old role for 4 or 5 months. Also, our head of engineering departed during some of that time, so I was also the pseudo head of engineering at the same time. So I had, I think at one time, 46 direct reports and that was a different game of scaling yourself, where you have to be very diligent about time prioritization to the max, and making sure that everyone on the team feels seen, feels heard, feels like you're engaged. You cannot just be a leader that is somewhere in the ivory tower that is hoping things get done. And I've never been the type of leader that is like that, and never been afraid of getting my hands dirty and being part of the work. But I think that I was very conscious of the challenges around scaling myself once I got that many reports and had to get that level in the weeds, realizing that, yes, this was only going to be a temporary state as I found the backfills for those key roles. which now I have, which has been great. But I think it was very helpful experiencing that to know that that is not the level of engagement that I can sustain forever.
Mm. I'm gonna go on a tangent here because you've probably seen this whole sort of dilemma or debate online around the need for having one-on-ones or the need not having for one-on-ones. So Jason Hong, the CEO of NVIDIA, is like he has no one-on-ones; it's not needed. And then we have like some sort of more human-focused kind of leaders that they really actually use one-on-ones as a space for building relationships and stuff like that. Where are you sitting in that sort of debate? Which side do you lead in?
I am on the pro one-on-ones side. I hear about those cases where leaders are not meeting with anyone and only chasing the biggest buyers. I'm extroverted myself, and I love the human connection piece, and so I need that for my own energy a lot of the time as well. And I see why that is a point of contention and why that is a debate. Because yes, there will be times where you're meeting someone is not the most important thing that only you could be doing at that moment. But at the same time, it's not a game of if I'm going to meet with them or not, but it's more of a game of in what order do I need to do this? And, maybe the ones that are less urgent, if you're like kicked out a few days, and the ones that are like doing things that are highly urgent, you get pulled in. But removing them from the plate is just not something that's part of my own personal ethos. And I would be very sad and lonely if I didn't have that human interaction.
Yeah, I agree with you. I keep all of my one-on-ones, but I'm continuously looking for ways to optimize the one-on-one time into obviously human interaction and building relationship, but also like focusing on how we're moving the needle and what is the most important thing I can work on. I sort of like unblock people, support them in their priorities. But it's a struggle. Like it's between business priorities. I mean, there's too many one-on-ones, then it's really become a big struggle in terms of
Yeah, ironically too, before COVID, if you would ask me that question pre-COVID when I was full-time in the office, I probably had maybe 2 or 3 one-on-ones. And I completely navigated the role by running into people in the kitchen and the hallway. And it accomplished 2 things for me. One was it definitely allowed me to have time if I needed to actually get work done. But the other thing was, I found, especially when you're trying to create buy-in for your initiatives, that, if you're setting up time to create buy-in and that's the first time they're seeing it, they have time to think about it, to think about the arguments against it, to like overthink usually. And so my strategy as a PM was actually very much I'm going to catch you off guard and bring this up in passing and like not have you like overthink about this. And so I was very much a less one-on-ones person, more informal, like kind of catch-ups in between things. But once COVID happened, it kind of forced my hand into having formal setup time to get a lot of these things done, or you just won't see those people anymore.
Yeah. There's a school of thought, obviously, that is whatever is in your calendar is a representation of it's the needle you're moving. So if you actually are about building relationship and focusing on the people, you have to see it on your calendar, right? It needs to be time allocated to it. So that's a really good point.
Yeah, it's a team sport too.
It is. Yeah, well said. So, I mean, before we move to your massive priorities and opportunities at Yahoo Mail and modernizing Yahoo Mail, I have one last question on your career. If you were going to redesign your career to become a GM, if this is the ideal stage or where you're going with your career, would you do things differently, or what would you do differently in terms of you had a perfect magic wand, you could have designed your career progression? Would you do it differently?
Yeah. I think early in my product career, I was very laser focused on my stuff, like the stuff that my team was driving, our team's goals. And, I almost had blinders on to kind of what was happening outside of me. And so it wasn't until later in my product journey when I got to more product leadership where I started to expand the aperture of my vision and started to see what else was happening and how it all interconnected. And so I think if I had to do one thing sooner and earlier would be to start paying attention to the stuff that's outside of your realm, because you might be surprised on how it connects to your work and also how it connects to the larger business. And as you grow in your career, you'll only have to do that more and more. And so, yeah, that's one piece of advice I'd probably give myself.
That's pretty good. Yes, it's not in isolation. It's like sort of what you were saying. It's a team sports. It's an entire ecosystem. You can't just like focus on your own specific things that you're optimizing. Well said. So let's make this transition to now Yahoo Mail. As you said at the beginning, is part of the DNA of internet. I think everybody has a Yahoo Mail. Like it's just part of everyone's. I still have mine, still use it all the time. But things are changing. I mean, every time I open Yahoo Mail, there's a new feature, there's something is going. So clearly there's amazing stuff that's happening on your side and your team with your team. So let's talk about that. The effort that you're putting and the journey that you and your team are going through around modernizing something that millions of users already have access to and have a long history with, and they want to rely on it every day. It's almost like the platform with a history. It's not just like a new product development. There's history, there's user behavior that already exists that you guys are dealing with. So let's just kind of like peel the onion or unpack that journey of reinventing Yahoo Mail and turnaround of the Yahoo Mail product. I'm assuming there's so many different aspects of it that you had to prioritize as you were going through this leading the journey of reinventing Yahoo Mail. So let's talk about that. What is the vision actually? What is this? Where you guys are going? What is this next future of Yahoo Mail looks like? What is the end vision for your team and what you're building?
Yeah. Well, thank you for also mentioning that it is like a larger piece of the puzzle of the internet than people think. I think going over to the Yahoo Mail side, I realized how massive it still was, even, decades after your first launch. Yahoo Mail is the number 2 email service in terms of reach. And, 1 of 3 Americans visit Yahoo properties every month. And so it is way bigger than people think. And specifically mail, you might associate the people that are using Yahoo Mail with the early users when it first came out, who since, obviously grown up and grown older. But, over half of our audience is millennial and Gen Z even to this day. And so I think, it is a pleasant surprise when that is, realized by the larger audience. But when it comes to the next generation of Yahoo Mail as a whole, we're trying to not just be an inbox. I think we're trying to transform it into more of a personal productivity engine. The vision of Mail is not to be your enterprise email or your work email. Like that is handled, that requires a different set of tools. That's a different type of business model. But instead, in a world where all these enterprise players are also creating consumer experiences, those consumer experiences are sometimes just hand-me-downs of what the enterprise experience looks like. We're coming at it the opposite direction. We are starting with what the personal use case of email is and transforming email from just a place of clutter that you kind of avoid or like try to not look at because you don't know what's in there, to an area that helps people act in real life and organize themselves and move through their day seamlessly. And so that's how we are thinking about it very differently, where it's less about email. Email is the input, but the tools and utilities that we're providing are actually the things to help you solve real problems in your personal life, not just the problems in your email.
It's interesting as it's exactly how I use it. Like my Shopify account, my Amazon, they're all connected to Yahoo Mail versus all of my other stuff like on the Gmail side or so it's, for me is Yahoo Mail is where I go for my personal stuff. And I was actually in preparation of this meeting, I was going through my Yahoo and then I found all these emails of folders like my wedding pictures that are all in one folder. My the first travel I went with my husband. All the pictures we took, all that travel plan, there was like in this folder on Yahoo Mail. I'm like, wow, my life's history is sitting in Yahoo Mail. So it's such a personal inbox for me that I really really like, and I love that your vision is about keep that sort of personal relationship with this inbox, a utility for your life. That's a pretty cool vision. So what is the biggest challenge? Is it tech debt? Is it brand? Is it competition? What is this? How do you guys decide what to focus on? And what is the biggest challenge to bring that vision to reality?
Yeah. So I definitely think it's a mix of elements. With email and specifically Yahoo Mail being around for so long, there's some very ingrained user habits. People do email in their way. There's not one right way to do it, but they have a method that they go through. And, we quickly realized, and when I joined, I was asking a lot of questions about the general patterns that we're seeing. And, we realized quickly that, yes, people are doing things a lot differently. Some people keep everything in their inbox and use unread and red markers to indicate those things. Some people use folders to figure out what's important. And so instead of kind of imposing a method on users, I think we took the opposite approach where we are flexible based on your method. And so I think that those ingrained user habits can stay, and also we'll try to find efficiencies in how they do that work. For example, if you are continuously moving a certain type of email to a certain folder, it would be something that would be on our roadmap to figure that out and also just do it for you. And so you don't have to have the overhead or the friction to have to continuously do that over and over and over again. Because we realize that, we're trying to create a product that you could spend less time in because you could go spend more time in real life. But if we're a product that takes a ton of overhead work, then, users aren't getting the value out of it that they need. So I think that kind of user habit piece is a pretty big one. And then I think the other one has a lot to do with just the overall perception of Yahoo. For example, one of the things we did very early on was due to a perception problem where we realized that, we were trying to promote Yahoo Mail as a product, and people would say like, I already have an email already. And there was this perception that you had to have a yahoo.com email address to use Yahoo Mail, or you had to start an email from scratch always. And so we made a very important shift into what I call going from an email platform to an email client, where, if you go to sign up for Yahoo Mail today, you'll see a big button that says sign in with your Gmail. And we called this the Bring Your Own Inbox initiative. And what we realized quickly is that, it created nearly 125% growth organically overnight of just people signing up for Yahoo Mail, because two factors. One, inherently the friction was reduced dramatically, right? Like you have an existing inbox, you get a button, you accept permissions, then you're in Yahoo Mail. That's great. I think the other part of it was, if we're requiring every user to start an email from scratch, you're going to have 0 emails. And so you have no reason to go over here. And it's actually a very manual process to put your email out there into the world. You've signed permission slips and forms and all of these things around, around in real life. And you're hoping that it all gets put back into this new email. It takes years. And so instead of fighting that uphill battle, we asked ourselves, where are everyone's most important things? And we should not care if they have a yahoo.com email address or not, because we're trying to build a set of tools to make their personal life easier. And it doesn't matter what their email domain is. And so I think that was a pretty large shift that created some pretty big dividends early on.
Can we unpack that? Because that's a major product decision, right? It's like almost saying it's not anymore a mail inbox. It's actually sort of your utility or productivity tool for a personal side. So can you unpack that? And the reason I ask is that quite a few of our community of products account are folks who are building products in sort of big Fortune 1000 companies. And they probably have similar challenges, like systems and products that have been around for a long time. There's certain user behavior, certain perception. So how did you decide? That sounds like a critical shift, a critical decision that impacted a lot of like adoption and usage of the product. What were some of the decisions? What are some of the trade-offs? And how did you go through this decision process to decide, oh, we're going to allow Gmail to also be opened here and pulled here? And
Yeah. Well, I think my first week, my mandate was we got to build great products that create organic user growth. And so the first question I had was, great, what creates user growth? Like what do we know about it? How do you actually move that? And so, the team put together a bunch of evidence of things that have done in the past, things that we tried and did not work. and also patterns around general retention. And the little gold that we found in that huge swath of data had a lot to do with the relationship between retention and the amount of emails that were in people's inboxes, especially for earlier users in their tenure or new users overall. And logically, it makes sense on its face. People sign up for a new email, don't receive any emails, retention is low. But we did not come at it that directly, and that was not the hypothesis going into this. It was actually very open-ended research that led us to discover the connection between retention and the amount of emails that people are receiving, and also not just the amount, but the types of them they're receiving as well. The different categories of emails, whether it's a shopping-related email or a personal email, and so that created the question of, great, how do we create those conditions where someone is more willing to stick around and use our product if they actually have emails? And we started to understand, why aren't they receiving emails in the first place? And it had a lot to do with this problem, which was, because they're signing up for a new email and they're not putting their email out there. And so I think it was this journey to get to that answer. It was not as direct, or it was not kind of pulling it out of the thin air. But it was rooted in the question of, how do we drive the business specifically, and what has done it in the past, and what are the patterns that we know? And from that, we gleaned that insight. And so once we had that insight, it was actually very easy to bring that to the table with the team, because we had this direct connection point. And, this functionality existed for some time, but it was actually very buried and actually was turned off. And so it was it actually just made us highlight it, make it a bigger deal. In a test, we quickly realized, yes, this is something. And it's not only bringing new users in with less friction, but they're staying more. And so that evidence as well, really convinced the team to kind of change their mind and, from being an email platform into this more of an email client approach.
God, I really am enjoying this conversation, because all of my recent conversations is all about experimenting with AI, experimenting with this and that. But this conversation is the classic definition of product management. Think about users, think about a specific metric, look at data, look at pattern, look what we have. It's just, that's what as this is good product management look like. And I'm really happy that we're having this conversation. It's just because in the world of AI, and I know you guys, I'm sure you're thinking a lot of AI, but you're not talking about crazy experimentation in AI and see what sticks. You're actually talking about good old traditional and proven product management, voice of customer, uses data. So that's really refreshing to hear that you're focused as a team on let's just do what good product management should be, look like, data and users and customers.
Yes, so AI are hammers looking for nails out there, and we want to make sure we find the nails first. So I think that we're coming at it with a lot of good foundational fundamentals.
That's amazing. And I'm assuming that's just something you're building as a culture in the team as you hire folks, and sort of part of your leadership style, that you hire for that and you focus on that and you build a culture around just as good product management look like.
We try to, yeah. And, it's definitely not been overnight or easy, but, there's a lot of product managers out there that, have done these fundamentals and been successful at them. And so, we've built a great team on the product side and throughout the rest of Yahoo Mail as well. And so, not only buy-in from the product managers, but also engineers, designers. It takes the whole squad to actually think in this way. And, all of the squads have really evolved their thinking from, maybe just picking one side of the equation of business or users to really trying to find the overlap of both.
So that's one good decision you guys made around actually surfacing the feature that already existed that moved your needle significantly around usage and around retention. How do you, as a team, balance this whole notion of long-term, because those are the long-term KPIs that you're looking for, versus what users are constantly expecting? And assuming in this day and age, everybody sees so many different things. And if you run a user experiment or user conversation, they're like throwing so many feature requests and they want to do this and this is gonna cool. So how would you focus your team around deciding what you want to do versus like experimenting with all these like new cool things that are happening that everybody wants?
Yeah. We had a very important kind of 2024 for this because we redesigned the desktop web experience for the first time in over a decade. And so the challenge with redesigning a product specifically that hasn't been changed in over a decade is that there's, like I said before, very ingrained user habits. And, we call it internally, like, you can't move the cheese. Like, people expect things to be in certain places. And if you are going to move the cheese, you have to be very clear about where it is, why you moved it, and like create education paths to get there, and also rewards and incentives of when they do it right. And so I think creating that, the whole flow is very sensitive and fragile, actually. I found that out very quickly when I started, coming from Tinder, where you basically have a new user base every year. That's how much like churn and re-signups there are. Into one that, people have been in this inbox for 26 years and, they've had the compose button in a certain place this whole time. And there's muscle memory associated with it. And so, yes, what we learned quickly is there is a sensitivity around this for our most tenured users. And so when we found what the success we found is actually has a lot to do. I know it sounds very prototypical, but it was very rooted in user education. I know everyone hates to hear this. It's the modals in the pop-up that usually like don't make the cut on the prioritization backlog. And, by pulling those in and actually walking users through it step by step, that was a very key reason why people went over to the new thing and stayed there. We tried it without that. And there was a lot of people that went to the new thing when we started testing it and then went quickly back because they were, very obviously didn't know where things were, didn't know why things were the way they were. And so by introducing the education early, that was a huge kind of help. I think the other piece of it, we call it, personalization versus customization. So, what users might be asking for a lot of the times is customization. They're like, I want the ability to have this setting on and this setting on. And, the infamous setting screens that quickly become everyone's headache and no one's owning them. And there's long lists of customizations. It quickly gets out of hand and you realize that you're trying to adapt the product for the 1% of the people that want those things, versus a personalization mindset where, in recognition of users' behaviors and their patterns, we intuitively try to introduce features that could help them and doesn't need to help everyone, but it's helping them with their problem. And so you're not overly crowding the user experience by introducing every feature to everyone when in reality, maybe only 30% of the people will find this valuable enough to use it. And the 70% that don't, the trade-off that a lot of PMs don't think about it is you are taking up real estate, mind share, attention for something that they have no intent to use. And, it creates this crowding of the products where, you've seen modern products today, there's just like, there's 26 buttons and it's, I know behind the scenes, it's, 26 PMs that are fighting for real estate. When in reality, you could be a lot more thoughtful with that through the right levels of personalization.
It makes me wonder whether there's like a significant difference in user behavior and personalization required by, let's say, someone like my mother who was like 65 years old and was 70 years old and she still loves her Yahoo Mail versus my nephew who's just 12 years old, 13, he wants to get his first email. And how would you balance this experience for both of them? Because I know he has heard, like I was asking him about Yahoo Mail and he've heard of it and he wants to have it. And, so it's actually very interesting, like two different generations, like a grandmother and a
all the time. I like my personification in my head is my mother-in-law and will she be able to use this? Similar to like, teaching your parents or grandparents how to use the remote control. And so, yeah, it's definitely something to be conscious of. And as we created these new experiences, we had new users that were coming in for these experiences, just go straight to the new thing. But the transition from the older version of Yahoo Mail into the newer version was something that we took very delicately. because of that sensitivity, and realizing that we had to educate them. We had to make sure all the features that they were looking for, that they were going to use on a habitual basis, like we're going to be there and be there where they expect. And so you're right. It is this interesting balance where you're trying to create one product for two very dramatically different users. And the first time in my career that I've had that drastic of a counterbalance, because in my previous life at Tinder, the more tenured users were actually the ones that were most open to the new things. And here it's this kind of opposite approach, because they are so tenured that they're used to things in a certain way, and there wasn't change for a longer period of time. It creates that uphill battle, and education and rewards are a huge part of connecting those dots and showing them giving them the positive signals of this will actually help you. And doing that at scale is, for consumer experiences, is an interesting challenge.
Yeah, for sure. So it's unique kind of product. Not every product, we all sort of focus on ICPs. This is my ICP and I'm building for them. But then your ICP is just so wide, right? Because it could be the grandmother versus the niece and nephew. So it's a very interesting challenge how to optimize it. And then you have a limited real estate to play with, as you were saying. So many interesting constraints to also still build a great product. So So I'm assuming it's not all about product management skills. Obviously, what we've been talking in the last 15, 20 minutes is all about core good product management. But then there's a lot of leadership lessons in there. So I kind of want to move our conversation to your lessons in leadership as you kind of move through your career and led multiple different kinds of products. So what do you think separates someone who runs a great product, all the features, versus someone who runs a great business? And you've done both. So where do you think that difference in skill exists from someone who is a good GM versus someone who is a good PM?
Yeah, this is the big challenge in that transition, that we were talking about earlier, product leaders optimizing for outcomes, and outcomes most likely specifically to their product, versus business leaders having to design these conditions that make outcomes inevitable. And everyone from product leaders to engineering leaders, design leaders are set up for that level of success, instead of you as the product leader having that level of control. And so that it's similar in a way, but also from a distance, and you have to set up the environment. You cannot be the force to actually drive those outcomes yourself, because back to the whole, you can't scale yourself. Seriously, you can't scale yourself to do it all. And so I think that's a key piece, is thinking in these systems, whether it's org design or resourcing or partnerships and business development or managing a P&L. You're constantly thinking in these of how to systemize this, how to make it actually be an autopilot thing. So when you're not in the room, the right outcomes are driven by the team. So that, I think that's the big switch there, versus product leaders, might sometimes think they need to be in the room, need to be in the product reviews, where the product isn't successful. At this level, you have to be comfortable with just setting the environment up and leaning on your leaders around you to step up in those right conditions.
Mm. And when you made that sort of became a leader, was owning P&L and all that stuff that we talked about, working with engineers, working with partnership, were there specific, beyond learning how to scale yourself effectively, were there the other set of skills that you needed to learn that sort of you would never thought as a product manager you need to spend time on?
Ooh. Let's see. I think it's funny because thinking through, in product management, I think there's a series of activities about thinking about the future, but it's usually the evolution of the product experience. And I think that the specific activity that comes to mind based on your question is, we did an activity very early on, I called all of the kind of extended leadership group into an onsite, and we did an activity about not just thinking about how the product needs to evolve, but how organizationally we need to evolve. And that can be the makeup of our team, the skill sets that we need to have to withstand the future, the tools that we might need, where we are dispersed, and we kind of try to paint this picture, not just how the product evolves, because that is very critical, but how we need to evolve around that product's evolution. Because, for all of us, for this product to change as dramatically as we hope, we can't maintain like the status quo. Like, we actually need to evolve with it. And so, we've identified, where we have skill gaps for, 2027 stuff or 2028 stuff. And that was very new experience for me as we were entering, this phase of the transition of Yahoo. Because, you're starting to think about the future, not just in terms of, hey, what cool features are going to be in the product in 2030, but, how does our team need to level up to make these things happen? And so, that's definitely a new skill that, I'm continuing to refine as we go through this.
Yeah, kind of resonates with me as I took over as a CEO of Products Account. To me is also, okay, I have to think about brand, I have to think about sales, I have to think about finance, I have to think internal operation, I have to think about hiring. And then these are all pieces of this machine that all need to work in a cohesive way, which when you're in a product manager, it naturally makes sense. But when you're a product manager, you're not in that space of, is finance working? Is the accounting working? If it's like, do I have the budget? Do I have the talent? Do I have the sales in the systems that are scaling there? So it's definitely kind of resonates with me what you've been down through. So let's talk about sort of a PM who wants to become a GM and kind of wants to go through your career progression. What are some of the advice you have for that person? What do they pay attention to? What are the skills they need to spend time on? And how would they prepare themselves to become successful in a PM to GM career?
Well, a few things. I think, one of my favorite references that I use a lot is actually from Shreyas Doshi, one of the product leaders in the space, and he talks about this matrix of agency and talent, and I identify a lot with that matrix because, coming in from marketing to product, I put myself on the low talent threshold of product management, and on the agency scale though, I've always been very high agency naturally, and so I was able to overcome like some low talent at the time of just not having the institutional knowledge in my grasp because of my agency. And so, but I see a lot of PMs, especially ones that are, newer to the space and like emerging in their careers, they're focused a lot on their talent development, which is great. But there's not a lot of conversation about their agency development. They're still waiting around to be told what to do, instead of like looking for those opportunities in doing them. And sometimes an important lesson I learned in my career is it's not chasing after, the thing that the CEO mentions at the all hands. It's actually chasing after the thing that is keeping the CEO up at night that they aren't talking about, and bringing those realities to the table and solving that problem without being asked. And so that, as everyone's chasing the things that have all the attention, right, there's a lot of competition for that space. And I kind of took a very counterintuitive approach, being high agency, looking the other direction where no one else is looking, and finding problems to solve with the team that no one has thought about or no one's even paying attention to. So I think that agency piece is incredibly important, I think, for emerging PMs. I think the other one that I talk about a lot with PMs early in their careers is about being comfortable with uncomfortable conversations. Like I think the one reality of not just being a PM, but just growing in your career overall is the one guarantee is you're going to have more and more uncomfortable conversations. And so finding your own personal ways through those and how to navigate them, how to like control yourself and your emotions and your internal temperature. I have a saying that's like actually in my office that it says 68 and breezy. And what it means is like your internal temperature. It's my constant reminder to like stay cool, calm, and collected, even in points of panic. Because earlier in my life, I was an athlete, and I was told by a coach, there's two different types of people. There are thermostats and thermometers. Thermometers react to the temperature around them, and thermostats set it. And, I was told that like probably when I was 11 years old. And I still talk about it to this day because of how that completely shifted my lens of like everything from uncomfortable conversations or dealing with conflict. It's everyone's natural reaction to be a thermometer in those situations, to just react, instead of realizing, especially in your own leadership, even without formal authority, just through informal authority, that you could actually set the temperature and lower it when it needs to. Or there's the opposite version of that too, where you raise the temperature on purpose, to drive urgency and to drive action. And so that shift, I think, is very important for PMs as they're kind of managing these products through usually purely informal authority.
That is very cool. I have not heard of that analogy of the thermostat versus the thermometer, but that's really, really cool. And it's about control, right? It's not about where you are in the temperature, but it's like, are you in control of where you are in that temperature? That is amazing. I love that framework. Thank you for sharing that. And if we kind of unpack the agency development, what are some of the things you've done? Maybe you're naturally a person that you mentioned a couple of times, you're already very naturally there, high agency person. But are there things people can do, or practices or situations that they could put themselves into, or like a mental model that they follow that they can kind of grow that agency?
Yeah. And so it's funny because I was asked this question recently from a student, who I was doing some mentoring of, and they were asking like, how far is too far with agency? And I kind of made up this as I went back. So there's kind of 3 levels to it. There's the doing your job without being asked to do your job. And everyone, I would say, it's like a job description. They have expectations, I hope, of what is expected from them to do. And doing that job consistently without being asked is like kind of baseline. And then the level above that is doing the things that aren't being done in the organization that, can inherently create value for the business or your team, that no one is doing. And, it's you identifying those and not doing them in a silo, but importantly, like doing them in collaboration with your team, with your manager. You're not just like going off on your own and being like, they're wondering, where's Kyle at? Like, we have no idea where he went. But doing it, identifying them, bringing them to the table, and not just bringing them to the table saying, and here's how I'm going to solve it. Then there's this like dangerous level 3, which this is the context of the student that asked me, which is, can I start doing someone else's job? And I think that's the dangerous area to play, where you start to, that's how you step on toes and create a lot of bad relationships. Only if and it has to be through the lens of your manager and your leader, and you bring those to the table. If you identify that someone is not doing their job, that is their problem, not your problem. And, I've seen PMs before, try to go solve those problems alone, and it usually creates bad outcomes. And so, sticking with levels 1 and level 2, I think are kind of a recipe for success, and not wandering into this level 3 zone where, you could inherently create a lot of bad blood between you and your colleagues.
Very well put. So, Kai, we only have you for a couple more minutes. I know you're busy running a massive organization, big turnaround story. Is there anything that I should have asked you that I didn't ask, and you still think we should talk about, or advice for our product management community?
Yeah. Well, I think AI is probably a really hot topic happening in the product manager space. And, my advice for product managers, and definitely kind of, this is my personal lens on it, in the lens that we're trying to apply into Yahoo Mail, is there's a lot of AI features out there that are just, let's just throw on an AI chatbot and call it a day, and check the box and say we're doing AI. I'm seeing a lot of them. I'm playing with a lot of them, and I think my personal take on how these tools are going to be used and how we're trying to use them in Yahoo Mail is actually a way more invisible layer, where it doesn't require work to create outcomes for users. Because not everyone's going to be a prompt engineer. When you think about, the story we said about, my mother-in-law trying to use the remote control, she's not prompting AI. Instead, if AI can be the solution to remove friction so she can know what an email thread is about, or to, see an unpaid bill in her inbox and immediately go to the pay page without having to dig through an email and figure out how she pays this bill. I think the removal of friction is a huge opportunity for where AI can play, and it doesn't need to be super visual to users. It doesn't need to create work and put the work on the users. But instead it's this, this invisible layer that just simplifies the experience overall. You don't need to overthink about it. And so that's kind of the advice I would give to PMs, as they're probably talking a lot about, what version of AI chatbot they want to put into their product, and to just take a step back and go back to those core fundamentals of, what user problems are we solving, what business opportunities are we trying to find, and AI could be one of the solutions to that, but it's likely not the only one. And if you're going to do it in a way that actually removes the work, doesn't create it.
Very well put. I love that framework. It's a great framework to think about how to embed AI onto our product without just like slapping a chatbot on top of everything, which is what's everybody doing. Well, this episode been, I've genuinely enjoyed this. This is a great conversation. Thank you for taking your time, and congratulations on your amazing journey. And we're looking forward to celebrate Yahoo's success and your career success. Thank you for spending time with us.
Thank you so much.